Stanford University.
Welcome to Stanford Medicine's 10th Annual Contemplation by Design Summit. I'm Dr. Tia Rich, founder and director of Contemplation by Design, and it's my deep honor to introduce our next teacher, Dr. Pamela Ayo Yetunde, who will be speaking to us about can the contemplative life support bonding across our differences. Dr. Yetunde is a pastoral counselor, author, and community Dharma leader. She is the author of Casting Indra's Net, Fostering Spiritual Kinship and Community, as well as co-editor of Black and Buddhist, What Buddhism Can Teach Us About Race, Resilience, Transformation, and Freedom. Ayo is co-founder of Buddhist Justice Reporter and is an associate editor with the publication Lion's Roar. Join me now in warmly welcoming Ayo Yetunde.
Good day, everyone. I want to begin with some words of gratitude to Dr. Tia Rich for inviting me to participate in Contemplation by Design 2023. I have experienced many times, probably countless times, the feeling of gratitude that arises naturally as the result of a contemplative meditation practice I call the Four Abodes Centering Yoga Practice. And I will return to this practice later, but for now I want to say that I believe the feeling of gratitude is so powerful, so powerful that it can radically change our consciousness from feeling alienated to feeling appreciation and belonging. So again, thank you, Tia, and everyone else. Thank you. I received the invitation to participate in this conference back in May, at a time of war in many parts of the world, and certainly before the recent surge of violence in the Middle East. These surges in violence have sparked, for many, I believe, a narrowing of our vision of communal and cosmic belonging to one another. It's heartbreaking, isn't it? I think it's heartbreaking because we know we have done better in the past. We can do better now. And we will do better in the future. I do believe that. And I say these things at this moment because I know it's very difficult for some of us to hear an optimistic message, the one that I intend to share. It might be difficult to hear. Our individual and our collective despair about things going on in the world right now may contribute to an outright dismissal of the talk that I intend to give on the enduring capacity to love. But I think that if now's not the right time to talk about love and its power, there will never be the right time. So please forgive me. I'm gonna make the decision to talk about love right now. So I've been a pastoral counselor for several years, counseling people from different religious traditions and different social locations. And I believe I have an understanding of what closes us down to our most loving and nurturing parts. So with that said, I'd like to offer you right now a contemplative listening practice, one that is inspired by the Noble Eightfold Path in Buddhism. The purpose of this practice is to simultaneously ease the suffering of the listener and the one listened to. And I'm calling this practice listen up, listen upward. So 8 parts. Number 1, in Buddhism, much of our suffering is based in narcissism. So the very act of truly listening to another is an act of self-forgetting, a form of selflessness. Selflessness leads to joy, and it's liberatory. Number 2, when we listen upward, we do so having removed the intention to hear what we want to hear. And should we hear what we don't want to hear, which is part of the human condition, we often hear things we don't want to hear. We recognize through mindfulness the desire to hear something else, refrain from judging others because they said something we didn't want to hear. And we also refrain from judging ourselves for having that desire. Then we reattune to what is actually being said. We resist the dynamic of reinterpretation to convince ourselves that we heard what we wanted to hear. Number 3, by forming the intention to listen and be perceived as a listener, the person communicating has a much better chance of experiencing a sense of bonding and belonging. Now, of course, we don't control another person's perceptions, and maybe we shouldn't try to do that, but giving someone as much attention as we can is an act of generosity that many people will experience as relief from alienation and isolation. Number 4, patience. I'm sure you've heard this. Patience is a virtue and a quality of character we usually appreciate when we benefit from another person's patience with us. So why not offer the benefit of patience to someone else, to others? Of course, we can't listen to someone go on and on and on about the same things, but there are skillful ways to be in dialogue with others when we get lost in the conversation or have other things we must attend to, because that is life, and there are other ways to go about letting that be known. So listening upward is about engaging, and engaging in and with the spirit and energy of mutuality, of equality. Number 5, listening upward involves right speech, which means no unnecessary interruptions and no imposition of our own story to minimize or maximize another's communication. Number 6, listening upward means paying attention to another's suffering, whether it's in the narrative, the body, or a combination thereof, because sometimes the story told with words is not the same story told with the body. So we work to uphold complexity, confusion, and frustration. Number 7, listening upwards is a practice that incorporates the fruits of mindfulness and meditation and works towards manifesting a non-anxious presence. And then lastly, number 8, listening upwards contributes to enlightenment because it aids our awareness of our interconnectedness. In other words, listening upward undermines the power of delusion of our separateness and other forms of delusion. Listening upward supports bonding across our differences. So I want to thank you for listening upward to the Listen Upward practice. It's a work in progress. I invite you to try it on. And don't try it on just for me and not just in this moment, but try it on for yourself and for those who could really use a listening ear right about now. And I think that's just about all of us. And so now I'd like to return to the subject of war, because it is war that led me to the contemplative life. So on September 11th, 2001, as the World Trade Centers were being attacked by terrorists, killing nearly 3,000 people and injuring many others with chronic illnesses, including PTSD, I was at an airport in Tucson, Arizona, watching the attacks on TV with hundreds of anxious and numbed strangers. The short story is that I arrived home by bus, carrying with me the collective anxiety of those in the airport. After some days at home, I still felt anxious. President George W. Bush announced that the United States would retaliate. So we were going to war. My birthday was fast approaching, and my friend gave me a copy of Thich Nhat Hanh's book, Touching Peace. The first meditation in the book is breathing in, I see myself as a flower. Breathing out, I feel fresh. Flower, fresh. Breathing in, I see myself as a mountain. Breathing out, I feel solid. Mountain, solid. Breathing in, I see myself as still water. Breathing out, I reflect things as they are. Water, reflecting. Breathing in, I see myself as space. Breathing out, I feel free. Space, free. After doing this meditation for the very first time, I began to feel at ease for the first time since leaving the airport. And this was the beginning of my contemplative lifestyle of daily meditation. But it has taken me some time to understand myself as having flower, mountain, water, and space elements. Why did it take so long? I think it took long because I'm conditioned, and I have been conditioned for decades to see myself as a Black girl or a Black woman or a Negro girl or a Negro woman or an African American or an African American same-sex loving left of center Christian Buddhist, and add any variety of labels that have served me well in some ways because it supported a belonging, but it also, these labels also sometimes served as a way of feeling separate. I feel confident that whoever's listening upward right now can feel into the pride and pain, gain and loss, the necessity of and freedom from the identity making that I just shared with you, because I take it that you have probably gone through a similar identity making process. I invite you now to take a couple of minutes, full 2 minutes, and reflect on the many ways you've been told who you are and the benefits and consequences that came with consciously and unconsciously adopting those labels. So let's take a couple of minutes and just reflect together. In just another minute, please. Thank you. Thank you for taking the time to be contemplative about how you came to be, how you identify, and what the bonuses and benefits have been to you, as well as maybe some of the downsides. So now I would like to invite you to imagine yourself as fresh as a flower. Fresh as a flower in bloom. As solid as a pristine mountain. As clear as still water. And now as expansive as space. I call this beyondness. How can we utilize this beyondness to protect ourselves and others from the delusion of our separateness and support each other across our differences? As I mentioned earlier, I'm a pastoral counselor. I'm also a human rights advocate, and maybe it's fair to say I'm a cultural observer. From these vantage points, I've been a witness to the rise of violence in the United States, in part due to the abuse of power in our governmental structures. One of the concerns that led me to write Casting Indra's Net, Fostering Spiritual Kinship and Community, is the fact that thousands, maybe tens of thousands, of once peaceable Americans engaged in a coup attempt. Lawyers have admitted to engaging in fraudulent schemes to overturn an election. And mobbery, a word I use in the book, mobbery is used to justify pretty much everything from getting a pair of athletic shoes to disrupting unfavorable speech, to doxing, to disrupting the peaceful transfer of power. We are destroying each other for a promise of, you fill in the blank, any number of promises. But I tell you what, these promises can't be delivered on without violence of some sort. And violence of many sorts is needed to maintain these promises. My hope is that through the contemplative practices I include in Casting Indra's Net, and those that aren't in Casting Indra's Net, that we who are unsuspecting, currently perhaps unsuspecting agents of violence, because we're being called into that way of living, that we will recognize when we are being duped and remove ourselves from the causes and conditions of the dangerous delusions of our separation. Also, it is fair to say that I'm a lover of wisdom. I love it. Love it, love it, love it. Especially applied wisdom. And that is why in Casting Indra's Net, I draw on various wisdom traditions to help keep us out of trouble and remind us that we can live into the loving and nurturing parts of ourselves that don't go away, that support our bonding. But how can we do this if fear has permeated so much of our culture? It seems to me that generally speaking, we don't express our fears openly for the fear, fear on top of fear on top of fear, for the fear that by just admitting to it, it compounds the other fear that we will be taken advantage of. When I was teaching in a chaplaincy program, I asked sort of a trick question. I can't remember what led me to the question, but it went something like this. How many people are afraid of a certain ex-president? I saw people look at each other as if they were searching to see if others had the same experience of the question, like they were asking, did I hear that right? And then I heard laughter like, that's absurd. Who would be afraid of that ex-president? And no one raised their hand. Then I asked the question, how many people are afraid of the current president? And nearly everyone raised their hands. I mentioned this example not to be divisive or partisan, but to demonstrate from that that little exchange to demonstrate the immediacy, clarity, and secrecy one can feel about their fear. Plus the fact that they hadn't spoken to each other about their fears. The violence, the mobbery, the mass shootings, the illegal or legal border crossings, the phobias, the proliferation of addictive drugs, the lack of a safety net to catch the vulnerable as they free fall into poverty, vigilantism, and the political agenda for retaliation at all costs are all part of our culture and contribute to a fearful society. But maybe fear itself isn't the biggest hurdle to bonding across our differences. Maybe the higher hurdle may be our unwillingness to sit with the fear of annihilation, to actually sit with it, to see how it distorts our minds and hearts and positions us to engage in preemptive strikes against each other. So I like to make this appeal to you as my kinfolk. This is important to me, to say that you are my kinfolk. I can't see you, I've never met you. But kinfolk, we must acknowledge our fear of each other and work through this fear together in the interest of forming a more whole and confident and optimistic view of humanity. I shared earlier that I was introduced to Thich Nhat Hanh's teachings in 2001. Since reading Touching Peace in 2001, I began reading almost every book Thich Nhat Hanh wrote, but I couldn't keep up because he was so prolific. But one book I was able to read was actually written by his colleague, Sister Chan Khong, who wrote Learning True Love, Practicing Buddhism in a Time of War. She wrote, by early 1966, we moved all of the classes and dormitories of the SYSS, which stands for School of Youth for Social Work. We moved all the classes and dormitories of the SYSS to the new campus in Phu To Hao, just outside Saigon. One night in June, a group of unknown men threw grenades into the campus temple, and two students, Nguyen Tan and Lê Van Vinh, were seriously wounded. Vinh has been paralyzed ever since. We had to take care of the wounded and also to organize funerals for our two friends who had died. Thai Tan Van asked me to write a speech for him to read at the funeral. After one day of mindfulness by myself, I wrote this eulogy, which was delivered by Thai Tan Van. Quote, "We cannot hate you, you who have thrown grenades and killed our friends, because we know that men are not our enemies. Our only enemies are the misunderstanding, hatred, jealousy, and ignorance that lead to such acts of violence. Please allow us to remove all misunderstanding so we can work together for the happiness of the Vietnamese people." After a day of mindfulness, the enemy is not the human being, but the seeds of our suffering, hatred, greed, delusion, jealousy, ignorance, and so on. Those are the true enemies. Let's contemplate this insight from Sister Chan Khong just for a moment. From a Buddhist point of view, the sum of our parts, we are not greater than that. From a Buddhist perspective, we are our parts, but our parts also include consciousness. And consciousness can be altered through contemplation, compassion, empathy, and service, and supports bonding across our differences. I said earlier that during this time of war, it may be difficult to receive a message about love because tensions are high right now. really high. People are choosing sides, demanding that others choose sides, and the ability to serve those in need, in desperate need, is hampered by constricted consciousness, manifesting in very material ways. With all due respect to all my kinfolk, the ones who are having the hardest time right now feeling love and imagining loving the stranger, the enemy, I believe now is the time, it's the right time for a message about love. And the kind of love I'm talking about is not romantic. And by that, I mean, it's not delusional. It's not clinging. It's not codependent. It's not possessive. It's not a power trip. It's not an opportunity for narcissistic supply. In other words, not an opportunity to puff ourselves up. It is, this kind of love is steeped in wisdom. It is optimistic about human nature. It tends towards decentering human beings. It affirms our potential for wholesome thought and behavior. It tends towards non-discrimination. It is partially sacrificial in that we give up a part of our egoistic amplification to make space for the presence of others. And also, this kind of love is intentionally consciousness altering in situations of suffering. When we can love like this, I believe we have a better chance of individuating from destructive groupthink, mobbery, and other forms of group violence. What might a regular day of mindfulness practice do for your consciousness and ability to relate across differences? What do you think? Having engaged in this practice, I can say it's profound, especially when you make it a regular practice. Can contemplation support what I call remarkable relational resilience? I believe it can. But what is this thing I'm calling remarkable relational resilience? Some time ago, 2015, I guess I started, I conducted my pastoral counseling dissertation research on the psycho-spiritual experiences of a group of women who embody intersecting identities that put them at risk of various forms of discrimination and oppression based on gender, race, sexuality, and religion. This group of women practiced mindfulness meditation, went on meditation retreats, practiced loving kindness meditation and loving kindness meditation retreats, engaged in service and leadership to their spiritual communities, and believed that the Buddhist teachings on no self, non-self, not self, that basically they all mean that we are interdependent. Consequently, these women showed very high levels of relationality across differences, across gender, race, sexuality, religion, and political opinion differences. They defied the stereotypes placed on them by society through the psycho-spiritual transformation of their spiritual practices. They expressed things like, I often feel closely related to power greater than myself. And my practice enables me to experience forgiveness when I act against my moral conscience. Also, improving the human community is an important spiritual goal, and I feel a strong spiritual bond with all humankind. If you want to know more about this study, you can read about it in my short book called Object Relations, Buddhism, and Relationality in Womanist Practical Theology. So at the start of my presentation, I mentioned the 4 abodes centering yoga practice. This practice came to me after many years of engaging in a contemplative lifestyle that incorporates teachings from various traditions. Why many traditions? I told you earlier, I love, love, love wisdom, and I really don't care where it comes from. I want to apply it. I want to feel the joy, happiness, support, solidity of living a life of wisdom. It is also the case I am, talking about labels, here they go. I am an interfaith, pan-Buddhist, universalist, professional spiritual director, and pastoral counselor who was trained through Spirit Rock Meditation Center's Community Dharma Leader program. I'm also a Soto Zen practitioner who studied progressive Catholicism at Holy Names University. Good contemplative practices, and by that I mean efficacious, like they really work. Efficacious contemplative practices support the integration of our whole beings, the wholeness of ourselves, while also supporting the insight that no part, no label, as many as I have, as many as you may have, as many as we string together, that no label or combination thereof is the being itself. So now what I'd like to do is to describe the 4 abodes centering yoga practice with you before I invite you to do it with me. So when my hip bones allow, and they don't always allow, I sit in a half lotus position. You can sit, stand, or lie down in whatever position brings you comfort, keeps you awake, and keeps you feeling steady. I bring my hands into this mudra. I'm going to show it to you. 4 fingers this way, fingers interspersed with the other fingers of the other hand, thumbs this way, usually with the palms upward facing down on my lap. This is called the Simpada mudra. In this mudra, I feel, you may not feel this way, but I feel like I'm bringing the concentration of my energies together. I feel that the tips of the 4 fingers and the tips of the thumbs support concentration. And also the fact that my fingers are clasped together makes it easier for my arms to rest on my thighs. I allow my breathing to be whatever it is, returning my attention to the sensations of breathing at the tip of my nostrils after I notice my thoughts are making a story or recalling a memory. These are just some brief instructions. After my allotted time in sitting this way has passed, I bring a heavenly abode word to mind, a heavenly abode word coming from Buddhist context. The heavenly abode words are loving kindness, compassion, equanimity, and sympathetic joy. So I bring these words to mind. I release the mudra, put my hands in the prayer pose or gasho or respect pose. I bring the thumbs to my sternum, and after each word, I center on it. I bring my thoughts back to that word, to that phrase. Then I bow, and then I bring the next word, followed by grace and gratitude, and then followed by the prayer of St. Francis. Help us to be instruments of your peace. So these are just some of the instructions, and we'll go through it together. I think I'd like to do that right about now. Oh, but before I do that, let me say this. One of the reasons why I use the prayer of St. Francis in my centering practice is because I was introduced to the prayer of St. Francis when I was at the Progressive Catholic University, Holy Names. And I used it as a chaplain resident to basically help me transition from one patient to the next patient, because what one patient was going through may not be what the next patient was going through. And I needed to engage in something that could help me adjust from the experience of being with one patient to prepare me to be with the next patient. I'm going to read it to you. And also, as I'm reading it to you, think about maybe if you pray a prayer or a maxim or some saying that means so much to you, that when you just recall a word or two or the title of it, it sort of invites your core values into your consciousness. So I'll read this to you. Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me bring love. Where there is offense, let me bring pardon. Where there is discord, let me bring union. Where there is error, let me bring truth. Where there is doubt, let me bring faith. Where there is despair, let me bring hope. Where there is darkness, let me bring your light. Where there is sadness, let me bring joy. O Master, let me not seek as much to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that one receives. It is in self-forgetting that one finds. It is in pardoning that one is pardoned. And it is in dying that one is raised to eternal life. So that's what I bring to my centering practice. And now I would like to invite you to practice this with me. Not for 50 minutes, not for 30, but just maybe for, I don't know, maybe 10 minutes. Let's see. We'll just try for 10 minutes. So let's begin. Please, if you will, and if you don't, that's fine too. That's fine too. But if you want to do this, please put yourself in a position. If you're sitting, feet on the floor, your legs naturally apart, maybe at the width of your shoulders. If it feels comfortable and you can, put your hands in this mudra down on your lap. Let your wrist rest on your lap. Close your eyes if you feel comfortable doing that. And if not, you can keep your eyes open, but just with a very soft gaze on the floor or your desk. Tilting your head down gently, just to where you feel your tongue naturally rise to the roof of your mouth. And allow yourself to breathe naturally. Sometimes it's difficult to go from a lecture straight into meditation or any activity straight into meditation. It's okay. Just allow yourself the time to have your transition. Noticing the thoughts that arise, the work that's left to be done, how you feel tired or energized. Just being with what is and accepting what is. Noticing the air as you inhale and as you exhale. And now releasing the mudra. Just bring your hands up in a gasho or prayer pose or respect pose with your thumbs at your sternum, and notice the sensation in your heart space. And now bring to mind the word loving kindness. And see if you can locate the feelings of love and kindness in your body. And once you've located it, use your imagination to see if you can spread the energy of love and kindness throughout your entire being. It can be side to side, up or down, multidimensional, allowing the feeling of love and kindness to envelope your entire being and resting in that sensation. Noticing what it feels like to be immersed in the field of love and kindness. And now bring your hands, your thumbs, just to press very gently against your lips. The purpose of doing so is to remind yourself to learn to speak words of love and kindness. And in doing so, you begin to embody loving kindness. So touching the lips gently and then moving your hands to your forehead as a reminder to think thoughts of loving kindness. So from heart as the center of thought about what loving kindness is, to lips for right speech, to thoughts, integrating the whole body in the sensation of loving kindness. And then bowing. The purpose of the bow is that we are surrendering parts of ourselves, parts of our egos, to love and kindness as one of our highest values and aspirations. And then we begin the sequence again with a different heavenly abode word. This time, let's bring the word compassion into our consciousness. Noticing what it is like to be open to suffering with others. Noticing what arises without judgment. It's your truth. This is what is arising as I center on the word compassion. Locating the sensation in your body, then use your imagination to allow the energy of compassion to flow throughout your entire being. Raising our hands to gently press our lips that we speak words of compassion, that we think words of compassion, and that we surrender to the aspiration to live a life of compassion. Bringing our hands to our sternum again, We'll bring the word equanimity to mind. Equanimity is like the feeling of being equanimous, of having our parts equal, peace, balance. And what I do when I bring the word equanimity to mind, I just do a body scan, trying to balance my body, head to toe, side to side. So that I know what it feels like to be equanimous. Feeling equanimous, being immersed in balance. Let's bring our hands to our lips, committing ourselves to practice speaking with balance. Bringing our hands to our foreheads to think in terms of equality, equity, balance, neutrality. And then bowing, surrendering ourselves, our ego, to this aspiration. Bringing our hands back to our sternum, the last heavenly abode, sympathetic joy. When I bring sympathetic joy into my consciousness, I intentionally bring a slight smile to my face. When I do that, I begin to feel joy, just in that slight smile, the tingling of joy. Notice what is happening in your being with a slight smile on your face, sympathetic joy. And use your imagination to let sympathetic joy, which means the joy for the well-being and success and happiness of others. What does it feel like? Let it permeate your entire being. And then bring your hands to your lips gently as a reminder to speak words of joy to others, about others, for others. And then to your forehead to think joyful thoughts for the well-being of others. And then bow to surrender to a joyful life. And bring your hands back to your sternum. Just sit for a moment, now having cultivated the energy of loving kindness, compassion, equanimity, and sympathetic joy. In my own practice, I bring these two words to mind. You may have other words, but these two words are grace and gratitude. And the prayer of St. Francis. Help us to be instruments of your peace. Help me to be an instrument of your peace. Peace. And then I take one final bow to my lips and to my head. And then I release the prayer pose. I open my eyes and straighten my body, kind of arouse my senses, and proceed with my day. So I want to say in closing before the Q&A that kinfolk, I can't wait to engage with you because I'm ready, right? I'm ready now. I'm ready for you, and I hope that you're ready for me and for each other. I want to say I'm very grateful. I'm very grateful for the contemplative life that I have learned and am still learning to live, especially in these times of war. I want to thank you for engaging with listening upward so that we can begin to see the causes and conditions that are taking place in our culture right now around mobbery. I don't think there's a better time to talk about love and then the enduring power of love and wisdom. And so I'm also very grateful to the Buddha and all the missionaries who took Buddhism wherever they took it so that we can talk about it today. I truly have come to believe that we are interconnected. And because we are interconnected, we have ethical obligations toward each other for the well-being of one another. If Sister Chan Kong is right, we are not the problem. The human person is not the problem. It's our consciousness. And if that's true, wow, what opportunities we have for engaging in consciousness altering love. So thank you for this time. I look forward to our engagement with one another.
Thank you, Ayo. And we'll begin with the question regarding your observation of the all too prevalent state of narcissism. And if you would speak to the relationship between the experience of love and the condition of narcissism, and whether there is, when we talk about the causes of suffering and the causes of the absence of peace, speak a bit about the relationship causally that renders the state of narcissism.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate that question because I think I think in society we know more about narcissism than we knew before. And we know how destructive it can be, especially when it's in a structure and the person who's suffering with extreme forms of narcissism is at the top of the structure and has various means to enact their will upon others. It has been said, and I think I have seen it in my own life, the damage that the absence of love early in our lives does to a person. Some people say, and I see this as being the case, is that the absence of love when a child needs it the most, actually, forms in them a defensive psychological structure where in order for them to survive, they have to love themselves so much that extreme form of what seems like love gets projected as a superiority complex. And a superiority complex so extreme that any threat to that sense of superiority can cause great harm. So I say this actually as a person who adopted a child who had been neglected, severely neglected and abandoned multiple times. And the work, she's allowed me to talk about this, the work that we've had to do in parenting largely has been around decreasing the tendency towards narcissism. So please, let's love each other from the very start. And when that doesn't happen, and we see people who are adults who are severely narcissistic, we can still love them because we understand that this form of projection, personality projection, is a way of protecting themselves because they didn't get the love. And then we love them not by giving them everything they want, not by agreeing with everything they say about themselves, but just by letting them know that they are seen, felt, heard, and we join them in their suffering. Because to be severely narcissistic is very lonely.
Thank you. Taking this one step deeper into the teachings you shared regarding fearing people, and often it's the case that a narcissistic person who also holds systemic power leaves states of fear in other people. So the continuum between your insights and wisdom regarding the injury beneath the narcissistic structure, if you would speak to how one who is in a condition of fear accesses their capacity to love.
I believe, and this, I can't answer this for everyone, right? Or anyone, but I will make an attempt. I think it's really important to acknowledge our fear. Really important to do that. Not always openly, because we don't always want to make ourselves more vulnerable than we already are. But if we can acknowledge, okay, I'm afraid. And then ask ourselves, what is it I'm afraid of? What is it exactly? And then follow that answer with, can I recover from that? Can I recover from the injuries that I think I will endure as the result of staying in the situation, or speaking truth to power, or standing up for my rights? Can I overcome the injury that I fear? And if the answer is, I don't think so, then I would ask, what would you need then to deal with the injury? Who could you call on for support to help you heal from that injury? After going through a series of questions, gathering our resources, maybe we will be better resourced within our own being to confront the fear. Fear is not always paralyzing. Sometimes it's an opportunity for facing the fear. There is a personality assessment tool called the Enneagram. And within the Enneagram, there's a personality type called the phobic. And there are the two kinds of phobics, if you will. One who runs away from fear and one who goes directly to the source of the fear. Counterphobic. So maybe experiencing with a little counterphobic personality quality. This is what happens when people stand up to bullies. The fear is there. The fear of injury is there. But also the fear of being perpetually bullied is there. As someone who has been bullied, I had to figure out which fear am I going to confront? And then how am I going to live with myself if I become a perpetual target of bullying? So the other thing I want to say is this. Just because you fear some situation or a person doesn't mean, especially a person, doesn't mean that they are not worthy of love. And standing up to them may be an act of love.
Thank you. And thank you for also emphasizing in your prior remarks that the regular practice of mindfulness and the beautiful centering practice you took us through in prayer helps support the process that you just described. Yeah. The next question. In your book, Black and Buddhist, you wrote, quote, when entering a POC, Sangha, tell them why you are there and ask them if they will support you in your practice. If the answer is, quote, no, then you will know you are not welcome. If the answer is, we'll try, then give them the chance to meet you where you are. This will require vulnerability, transparency, receptivity, and humility. Please remind me, how can I find my, quote, remarkable relational resilience to enter and inquire about the Sangha or any other unknown space for that matter?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, whoa. I love how all of that was brought together. It's juicy and complex. How can I find my remarkable relational resilience in these situations? Well, one of the reasons why we practice contemplation is so that we can touch on that innate resilience. It's already there. We just need to touch on it on a very regular basis to remind ourselves that it's there. In doing so, then we have a greater opportunity of not only providing a non-anxious presence for other people, but being less anxious in the presence of others, right? So we go into a situation with people we don't know. We come in with needs. Can we make a request? Like, I'm here. The reason why I'm here is this. And then, and I'm going to bring in some teachings from Marshall Rosenberg from his Nonviolent Communication, otherwise known as NVC, make that request without the expectation that your request will be honored. Make it without the expectation. Because if you can make it without the expectation that your request will be honored, you are making that request freely. No coercion, no demand, free to leave, free to stay, free to ask more questions, free to determine whether that community is right for you. So the resilience is there. Just touch into it. When you touch into it, hopefully you're feeling the confidence that's already in you, and then go forth.
Thank you. Our next question is, how do we be patient in conversation? Point 4 of listening upward, and still communicate compassionately to the talker that we need the conversation to end if we're not in the right mood to effectively listen or
Mhm.
need to go, or the person is repeating with no end in sight. How to stand up for our needs and end conversation without making the person feel bad.
Yeah, right. Well, if I love this question because this is like life. If you're speaking with someone who is severely narcissistic, it's very unlikely you'll be able to prevent them feeling bad when you say, and as for however you say it, I need to leave, or I need to go do something else, or I heard you say that before, right? It's very like, because someone who's severely narcissistic has an expectation that you will be there as long as necessary, because they are actually using your energy. But very few people actually are that narcissistic. So for the rest of us, you can always say you can always use reflection as a practice, as an exercise, to reflect back what you heard, signals to the one who's speaking, they heard me. They heard me. Maybe a question about whether you heard properly. Did I hear right when you said blah, 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 blah? And they say, yes, you did. Yeah, cool. Got it. Thank you. Got it. Is there anything you need from me in terms of, what was being spoken about? Anything? If the answer is no, it's like, okay, cool. All right. Do you feel heard? I do. Good, because I heard you and I'm with you. And now I have to turn my attention to fill in the blank. But if you want to talk about this some more later, I'll be available for you. And so, every interaction is unique. No one can say what should be said in this particular interaction, because there's so much going on, even between me and Tia right now. There's so much going on, so much unspoken, right? That no one can say, this is what Ayo and Tia should be doing right now, talking about, right? That can't happen. So trust yourself. Trust that you listened to the best of your ability. Reflect back, so that the person who's speaking knows that they were heard. That promotes a sense of belonging and bonding. There are always differences, always differences. But if you can let someone know that they were heard, seen, felt, witnessed to, that may be largely all that they needed in the first place.
Thank you. Could you speak about how you help bridge the gap between individuals who could fall into a narcissistic orientation of, I'm going to do my contemplative practice so that I can think more sharply and push myself without burning out and have a power of concentration and self-soothe and be keenly aware, versus people who enter into contemplative practice who feel the call to kinship and service and collective well-being, and they're in that spiritual emergence or a crisis of despair, that the paths and practices often are very similar for both entryways. And yet we're at this time now where we have the opportunity to look at how do we unite those initial doorways into more of a community of how contemplative practice can bond us across our differences, even within the practice of doing contemplative practice.
That's right. I would like to look at these motivations for contemplative practice as perhaps a continuum, that maybe we can trust each other to know what it is that we need at the time we decide what kind of practice we're going to engage in and why. The reason why I say that is because I'm thinking about maybe my own life. I shared with you the first meditation and visualization that I engaged in from Thich Nhat Hanh's Touching Peace. I wanted peace of mind. I was anxious. We were going to war. I didn't feel good in myself. And so I wasn't at that time looking to contemplative practice as a way of improving my relationships with others. I wanted to feel better inside myself. And I'm thinking, I'm also thinking about how I've been acculturated within the contemplative communities, that a meditation retreat looked a certain way. For example, the first meditation retreats I attended were at Spirit Rock Meditation Center, which is in the Insight tradition, which is inspired by the Theravada tradition of long, silent meditation retreats. Very little interaction with others. Even it's advised not to even really look at other people. Right? You're just in your meditation zone. Okay. So I did that for years before I went to a Plum Village Thich Nhat Hanh tradition retreat, where they were talking, they were in small groups, they were singing, reciting gathas and so on. And I remember it took me 2 days before I was no longer angry. Like, this is not how a meditation retreat should be. They were focused on engagement, how to engage with one another, how to be in relationship with one another, how to listen to one another. And then after my anger subsided, I enjoyed the retreat immensely. So there were times, and I guess there are times in our lives where the focus on self is more important and probably needed in order to be in better relationship with others. But if a person recognizes that the contemplative life, I'm going to use the contemplative lifestyle to avoid relationships, I think that could be problematic and very lonely in the end.
Thank you for animating the reality that there are many ways of engaging in contemplative practice, and that each way is the right way for that group and individual at that time. I'll also invite you to speak about your own creative gift to weave together the wisdom from multiple traditions and speak to the needs of this moment. And some traditions are, I'd say, rigid or constricted and assert that only a vertical path through entering into that tradition and staying with that tradition and following the classical practices will render the merits of the practice. And then others are more receptive to the quilting together across traditions. So if you could speak to how you have navigated the traditions and come into your own place of creative expression.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I grew up in the United Methodist Church in a family that believed that the Bible was and is the inerrant Word of God. So in these ways, I grew up in a very strict environment where you didn't question. I mean, didn't question anything. If you tried to question something, you got to look like kind of like the look I'm giving you right now. It's like no, you don't do that. And I never felt that was right. It just never felt right in my body to say, I don't understand that. help me understand that. That doesn't make sense to me. How could God want his child dead if that was his only beloved son? You know, these kinds of questions, right? But no.
Mhm.
So as a teenager, like all teenagers who are paying attention, the gift of being a teenager is being able to say, you said this, but you're doing that, you're a hypocrite, right? So I could see the hypocrisy, at least that's what it appeared to me at the time. And true enough, there are hypocrites, but also these traditions have such high aspirations and offer such, enormous promises that in part it attracts people to it, and we fall from the mark consistently because it's like not achievable. But when I decided that I wanted to work in hospice, this was just over 20 years ago. And I began meeting people outside of my spiritual tradition, my religious tradition. I had left the United Methodist Church, but still didn't know much about other traditions. I said, what's more important to me? Is it more important to me that I only work in a hospice organization where everyone shares the same beliefs? Or is it more important to me to learn about the beliefs of others so that I can be as beneficial as possible? And what I decided was I wanted to be as beneficial as possible because I love the diversity of working in a pluralistic setting in spiritual care. So I made a commitment early on that I would remember that, and I don't know if this is true or not, Tia, but that I would remember that I have the capacity to find at least one point of connection with everyone I meet. Everyone. One point. I don't know what the point is, but from that one point, I would then we would then broaden together to discover with each other what are the other points of connection we have. And thinking that way about myself, true or not, thinking that way about myself, I think is what has allowed me to then say, if I can connect with everybody on one point, I bet you within their tradition, I can find points of connection. Mm-hmm. And I think that is true. Within the sacred texts of the traditions I'm familiar with, I bet you I can find points of connection, and we do. Love, compassion, mercy, charity, right? Generosity, devotion, all of these things. So, yeah, I have stayed with that conviction about myself, that commitment. I continue in this work of spiritual care. I have clients from a variety of traditions. And that is not to gloss over our differences. We have many differences. But I think about, well, what are the points of connection? And also, if the differences get in the way, if you will, we need to explore that too.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that beautiful description of your locating yourself in the position of kinship, and then find the ways that kinship and connection animates and expresses itself between you and between different traditions. Thank you.
And then I would also say this: there's so many traditions. Yes. And I have not even touched on the varieties of traditions there are, but I'm open to it.
Thank you. We have another question. If someone is seeking freedom from self and the external, how would you define true liberation? So in its entirety, it reads, if someone is seeking freedom from self and the external, and this means free from external input or fear from not opening to one's inner truth, how would you define true liberation?
Mm-hmm. Ooh. Wow. I want to know what true liberation is. I want to know. So I'm not defining it because actually I was thinking as I get older, as in, I don't know how many more years I'll be engaging in the kind of work I'm doing now. I told myself, if I'm going to write another academic book, it'll be about what is truly liberative. So I love the question. I want to know. Now, in the meantime, I have not met anyone yet who is completely impervious to the impact others have on them. Not completely, right? I have experienced, and I do know people who aren't as triggered as they used to be as the result of practice. And there's one teaching in Buddhism. It's the teaching where a woman got pregnant outside of marriage. She takes the child to a monk, a celibate monk, who says, "This is your child. Take him." And the monk, who never had sex with this woman, said, when she said, "This is your child," "Is that so?" And takes the child until the mother returns for the child. This "is that so?" might be a really good tool, if you will, to use as we practice being less reactive to external factors impacting our sense of self, our consciousness, and so on. When it's directed towards us, "Oh, is that so?" Just keep moving. What it does is it diminishes the power one has over what they expect will be our reactions. "Oh, you're such and such and such. Rather than say, "No, I'm not. You're the one who's da-da-da-da." "Oh, you're such a Oh, is that so?" Then keep it moving. It's hard then initially to have to deal with the fact that you didn't react to that. So now I'm carrying this, right? I said, "Is it so?" And now I'm carrying the burden and the challenge of working with this in my psyche. But trust me when I say, the more you're able to do that, the easier it gets. So that over time, when you say, "Is that so?" you can do it with a smile because you know what they're saying about you is not true. Or at least that's not the entire truth. Because usually when we accuse someone of something, or we blame someone of something, whether that act is true or not, it is not our whole being that they're speaking of. It's something that we did, something we acted out of. It's a part of ourselves. It's not our whole being. So "is that so?" allows for, Tia, the space that you talked about we had for the pause. "Is that so?" is a pause and interrupts the dynamic of retaliation and defensiveness. It might even allow for deeper connection down the road.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing that powerful story that will be memorable for us all. Someone writes that they love that. We experience the depth of your wisdom and the generosity of what you've shared in our time together today. And out of respect for you and your time, we will draw to a close and look forward to following your teachings as they come forward in your writings or other forms of your expression. Thank you very much, Ayo.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a real honor to be with you all. And thank you for this incredible work. I mean, this is what causes me to be hopeful, right? These kinds of interactions on things that are very beneficial for us all. So wishing you all the best. Thank you.